Hello and welcome to my video regarding writing in rhetoric. Now to start with, a brief discussion about rhetoric itself. What is rhetoric? Aristotle described it in many ways, one of these being, "It is thus evident that rhetoric does not deal with any one definite class of subjects, but, like dialectic, is of general application, also that it is useful, and further, that its function is not so much to persuade as to find out in each case the existing means of persuasion." Now, not to imply that I know better than Aristotle, but you really have to tease a definition from him. I would call rhetoric the means and study of any mediated environment, whether that be the use of written language, speech, digital media, or print, but I would also include images and, truthfully, anything else that produces a sensory response. It is an examination of how these things not only impact our behavior in daily lives, but also how they influence, manipulate, and guide our culture, our politics, and our perceptions of the world that surrounds us. In order to understand rhetoric, one must look at the mechanics of not just what we are communicating, but the why and how of it, as well as any kind of underlying social implications. I like to use a single word as an example: plantation. Now, by itself, plantation is, of course, just another word. But what about any unintended associations made with this word? Possibly still just a word to many, while still others may associate it with southern plantations and the ugly past of slavery. How about if we change the text? Any better now? And now? What if I do this to it? A remediation to unload the word with possible unintended rhetoric not necessarily warranted toward an almond plantation. My point here is that rhetoric, intended or not, acknowledged or not, is around us every day, seeking to influence our decisions. Okay, so despite what it may sound like, rhetoric is not just talking about how things make you feel and why. Part of it may be, but it goes deeper than that and is tied to concepts from many different fields. While rhetoric has the previously highlighted connections to philosophers of ancient Greece, there is also a connection to sociology and the concept of ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism would be the tendency to view other social or ethnic groups through the lens of your own culture while also believing in the superiority of your own group. Webster defines it as the emotional attitude that one's own ethnic group, nation, or culture is superior. These are things that can help us understand the impact of rhetoric on specific demographics and populations. An example of this would be targeted advertising. An advertiser needs to know their demographic, their target audience, in order to properly control the rhetoric surrounding their product. An example of failed rhetoric in advertising would be when General Motors failed to realize that a car named Nova was not going to sell well in Spanish-speaking markets, as the name loosely translated means won't go. The field of academic rhetoric, while less concerned with total number of units sold, is still focused on fundamentals of communication and how it impacts our lives. The three papers I focused on for this project were Rhetorical Closure by Craig Rood, Assistant Professor of English at Iowa State University; I'll Google It, How Collective Wisdom in Search Engines Alters the Rhetorical Canons by Jill M. Parrott, doctoral candidate at the University of Georgia; and Ayn Rand, Conservative Populists and the Creed of Self-Immolation by Brian Jackson, Associate Coordinator of University Writing, Brigham Young University. All focus on the societal impacts that rhetoric plays in our daily lives, though from very different perspectives. Rhetorical Closure is concerned with the rhetoric that would label those who simply disagree as the enemy, rather than call for discourse. I'll Google It is looking at the rhetorical implications when the results of search engines used to find research, as well as so much more, are predicated upon the results and subsequent search histories of all those who have come before us. Ayn Rand and the Conservative Populists seeks to examine the implications associated with a rhetoric of victimhood as displayed by certain right-wing movements. Though each one of these papers examines a very different perspective of rhetoric, they do share a few things in common. Each paper establishes its theories against the larger backdrop of the discipline, delineating their claims alongside their peers. Rhetorical Closure does this through no less than 70 works cited of other authors, explaining how the theory fits in with its mirrored counterpart, rhetorical openness. I'll Google It points to the phenomenon known as Google bombing and its measurable impact as import to consider its rhetorical ramifications. It does this by establishing itself not just within the scholarship of rhetoric, but also within the technology that allows this collective knowledge. Ayn Rand, the conservative populist and the creed of self-immolation, establishes itself by demonstrating populism as a rhetorical strategy in which the people are portrayed as righteous victims to a corrupt system, a system that, in their eyes, vilifies them for their success and seeks to sacrifice them to appease the hordes who have not helped themselves at the great trough of capitalism. Another facet shared by these three papers is their clear, concise language. Rhetoric is not brick and mortar, not biology and blood. It is an abstract, and as such needs to be discussed in unambiguous terms. Each of these papers accomplishes this through real-world examples of the concepts discussed, connections to the theories and ideas presented, and to the discipline of rhetoric itself. It would seem that the main components of these three papers is truly being informed regarding the theories and tenets of rhetoric, maintaining impartiality regarding the subject matter, and a willingness to thoroughly research something to provide a complete and relevant representation of where it sits in our world, rhetor or rhetoric. Thank you.